Blood never lies, but the people you trust most absolutely do. Billionaire CEO Vera Harrington thought her only child died 5 years ago. Then, a chance encounter with a struggling single father and a little boy with her exact green eyes shatters her reality. But the father's warning was clear. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel in downtown Seattle, blurring the dazzling city lights into streaks of neon. Inside the grand ballroom, the atmosphere was a suffocating mix of expensive perfume, clinking champagne flutes, and the quiet murmur of the city's elite. At the center of it all stood Vera Harrington. At 32, she was the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Harrington Global, a real estate and tech empire she had built from the ground up after inheriting a fractured company from her late father. Vera was a woman carved from ice, clad in a bespoke emerald green gown that mirrored the startling rare shade of her eyes. She navigated the charity gala with calculated grace. She smiled when required, nodded when expected, and offered nothing of her true self. She had learned long ago that vulnerability was a liability. 5 years ago, on a sterile hospital bed, she had lost the only thing she ever truly loved. Her father Richard had stood over her, his face grim, delivering the news that her newborn son had not survived the complicated delivery. Since that night, Vera had buried her heart beneath billions of dollars and an impenetrable fortress of corporate dominance. Across the ballroom, far away from the glittering chandeliers and the elite circles, Nathaniel Hayes was having a very different kind of night. Nate, a 34-year-old former architect, who now ran a struggling botanical design business, was furiously trying to salvage a collapsed floral archway near the service elevators. He was exhausted. His hands were calloused from working in the dirt. His tailored but noticeably worn suit felt stifling, and his mind was preoccupied. His babysitter had cancelled at the absolute last minute, forcing him to smuggle his 5-year-old son, Luke, into the event through the service entrance. "Stay right here, buddy. Do not move from this stool," Nate had instructed, handing the boy a coloring book and a fistful of crayons. But 5-year-olds are rarely known for their obedience. Drawn by the glittering lights and the towering ice sculpture of a swan in the center of the room, Luke slipped away from his makeshift sanctuary. He clutched his worn, stuffed bear, navigating through a forest of designer gowns and tuxedo-clad legs, completely invisible to the titans of industry around him. Vera had just excused herself from a painfully dull conversation with a state senator when she felt a slight tug on her gown. She looked down, expecting a bold junior executive trying to pitch a startup. Instead, she found a little boy. He was small for his age, wearing a slightly faded corduroy jacket and a crooked bow tie. But it wasn't his clothes that made the air vanish from Vera's lungs. It was his face. Luke looked up at her, tilting his head. "Your dress matches your eyes," the boy whispered, pointing a small, chubby finger at her. Vera froze. Her heart a muscle she had meticulously trained to feel nothing slammed violently against her ribcage. The boy's eyes were not just green, they were her exact hyperspecific shade of emerald, complete with a tiny, unmistakable fleck of gold in the left iris. As he tilted his head, the soft ballroom lighting illuminated the delicate skin behind his left ear. There, plain as day, was a small, crescent moon-shaped birthmark. It was the exact same birthmark Vera had on her own shoulder, the exact same mark her late mother had possessed. Where are your parents?" Vera stammered, her typically commanding voice trembling. She dropped to her knees, heedless of the thousands of dollars of silk pooling on the damp ballroom floor. She reached out a shaking hand, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering mere inches from the boy's cheek. "I'm with my dad," Luke replied softly. "He's fixing the flowers." Before Vera could speak another word, a panicked voice cut through the hum of the crowd. What? Nate pushed through a cluster of wealthy donors, his face pale with panic. When he saw his son standing with the billionaire hostess of the event, his relief instantly morphed into aggressive defensiveness. He closed the distance in 3 long strides, sweeping Luke into his arms and pressing the boy's face into his shoulder. "I am so sorry, Miss Harrington," Nate said, his voice clipped and tight. He wandered off. It won't happen again. Vera stood up slowly. The height difference was evident. Nate was a towering figure with broad shoulders and tired, stormy grey eyes. But Vera refused to be intimidated. She couldn't tear her gaze away from the boy hiding in the crook of Nate's neck. "Who is he?" Vera demanded, all pretenses of polite society evaporating. "What is his name?" Nate's jaw tightened. He recognized the dangerous, obsessive glint in the billionaire's eyes. It was a look of possession. "His name is Luke, and we're leaving." "Wait!" Vera commanded, taking a step forward. She reached into her clutch, pulling out a platinum business card. "You're struggling, I can tell. Your suit is from 5 seasons ago, and you're working the service entrance. Let me help you. I can pay for his schooling, set up a trust." Nate slapped the card away. The sharp smack drew the attention of nearby guests, but Nate didn't care. His eyes blazed with a protective fury that rattled Vera to her core. "Keep your money," Nate sneered, his voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper, meant only for her. "I know exactly who you are, Vera, and I know what your family is capable of. Don't look at him like that. He's not yours." Nate turned on his heel and strode toward the service exit, leaving Vera standing frozen in the middle of the ballroom. "I know exactly who you are." The words echoed in her mind like a death knell. She watched the broad-shouldered father disappear into the shadows, carrying a boy who held the ghost of her past in his eyes. The room began to spin. Vera Harrington, the woman who never flinched in the face of billion-dollar corporate raids, stumbled backward, gasping for air. The penthouse suite of the Harrington Tower was a masterpiece of modern architecture, offering a panoramic view of the Seattle skyline. Tonight, however, it felt like a prison. It was 3 a.m. Vera paced the length of her living room, a half-empty glass of scotch abandoned on the marble kitchen island. She couldn't close her eyes. Every time she did, she saw the emerald green of little Luke's eyes and that undeniable crescent birthmark. She walked over to a locked mahogany desk in her study, unlocking a hidden drawer. Inside sat a small, velvet-lined box. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing a pair of tiny knitted hospital booties and a faded ultrasound printout. It was the only tangible proof she had that her baby had ever existed. The umbilical cord was wrapped. There was nothing the doctors could do, Vera. "I'm so sorry." Her father's voice echoed from 5 years ago. Richard Harrington had been a tyrant, a man who viewed his daughter not as a person, but as the heir to an empire. He had deeply disapproved of her secret relationship with a young, idealistic architectural intern. When Vera had gotten pregnant, Richard had been furious. He had isolated her in a private, heavily guarded estate during her pregnancy, ensuring the media never caught wind of the scandal. Could her father have lied? The thought was a poison seeping into her veins, terrifying yet intoxicatingly hopeful. Would Richard Harrington have faked the death of his own grandchild to ensure his daughter remained focused on the family empire? By 4 a.m., Vera had made her decision. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she rarely used. "Mercer," a gruff voice answered on the second ring. David Mercer was Harrington Global's head of corporate security. He was a former intelligence operative who specialized in making problems disappear and in uncovering truth that were buried deep. "I have a job for you, David. Off the books, highly classified," Vera said, her voice dropping to an icy, authoritative register. "I need you to look into a man named Nathaniel Hayes. He runs a botanical design firm in the city. More importantly, he has a 5-year-old son named Luke. I need everything on them. Birth certificates, medical records, tax filings. And David, yes, boss, I need a DNA sample from the boy today." "Understood," Mercer replied, asking no questions. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in covert surveillance. Mercer tracked Nate and Luke to a modest, slightly run-down craftsman home in the Seattle suburbs. He hacked into the state's medical database, uncovering anomalies that immediately sent red flags up the flagpole. There was no birth certificate for Luke Hayes on file in the state of Washington. Furthermore, Nate's late wife, Sarah, had died of ovarian cancer 3 years ago. Medical records indicated she had undergone a full hysterectomy 2 years before Luke was allegedly born. She couldn't have been the mother. So who was? The opportunity for the DNA sample presented itself on a crisp Tuesday afternoon. Mercer observed Nate taking Luke to a local community park. Nate was distracted, taking a phone call from an angry client while pushing Luke on the swings. After a while, Nate handed the boy a small apple juice box. When Luke finished, he dutifully trotted over to the municipal trash can and tossed it inside before running back to his father. As soon as they left the park, Mercer approached the bin. Wearing latex gloves, he retrieved the discarded juice box, sealing it in a sterile evidence bag. He drove the sample directly to Cascade Genetics, a highly confidential private laboratory in Bellevue that catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy, ensuring total anonymity. Vera provided a swab of her own cheek. Then the waiting began. For 3 days, Vera could barely function. She snapped at her board of directors, cancelled 2 multi-million-dollar acquisitions, and locked herself in her penthouse. The memory of Nate's fierce, terrified eyes haunted her. "He's not yours." Why was he so angry? Why did he look at her not with awe, but with deep, profound hatred? On Friday morning, the secure email arrived from Cascade Genetics. Vera sat at her massive oak desk, the cursor hovering over the encrypted PDF file. Her breathing was shallow. If she clicked this, there was no going back. If it was a match, it meant her entire life, for the past 5 years, was built on a monstrous, unforgivable lie. It meant her father was a monster. It meant she had a son. She clicked the file. The document loaded, filled with complex medical jargon, genetic markers, and graphs. Vera's eyes bypassed all the scientific data, darting straight to the bottom of the page, where the final conclusion was printed in bold, undeniable black ink. Probability of maternity, 99.999%. Conclusion: the tested female is the biological mother of the tested child. A choked sob ripped from Vera's throat. She clamped a hand over her mouth, tears violently blurring her vision. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't seeing ghosts. Her baby was alive. He was out there living in a rundown house, wearing faded corduroy, while she sat in a billion-dollar tower grieving his death. Rage, hot and blinding, followed the grief. Her father had stolen her child, and Nathaniel Hayes, this struggling florist, had him. Did Nate know? Was he part of her father's sick scheme? Or was he a pawn just like her? Vera slammed her laptop shut. She didn't call her lawyers. She didn't call her security team. She stood up, grabbed her car keys, and headed for the private elevator. The Ice Queen of Seattle had finally melted, and in her place was a mother whose child had been stolen. She was going to get her son back, and God help anyone who stood in her way. Gravel crunched aggressively beneath the heavy tires of Vera's black Porsche Panamera, as she tore into the quiet, rain-slicked suburban driveway. Her knuckles were bone white against the leather steering wheel. Beside her on the passenger seat lay the manila folder from Cascade Genetics, a terrifying beacon of stolen truth. Before Vera could cut the engine, the vehicle's Bluetooth system chimed with an incoming call from Mercer, her head of security. She jabbed the screen to accept. "Boss." Mercer's gravelly voice filled the cabin devoid of his usual calm. "I dug deeper into the background like you asked. The man you met at the Fairmont. He's a ghost. The identity he's using is a total fabrication, built from scratch 5 years ago. His real name is Ledger Walker." Vera froze, her breath catching in her throat. Ledger Walker, the junior architect who worked under my father, the one who vanished right around the time. She couldn't finish the sentence. The memories were too painful. She and Ledger had shared a brief, intensely passionate romance hidden in the shadows of the corporate world. When her father, Arthur Harrington, found out she was pregnant by a lowly employee, his wrath had been biblical. "Yes," Mercer confirmed grimly. "He falsified his credentials, changed his name, and bought that suburban house in cash. Whatever happened 5 years ago, boss, it wasn't just a coincidence. He planned this." Vera ended the call, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She stepped out of the Porsche, ignoring the icy Seattle drizzle that immediately began ruining her tailored silk blouse. She marched up the wooden steps of the Craftsman home and pounded on the front door. Moments later, the door swung open. Ledger stood there, clad in a faded grey t-shirt and jeans, a wrench in his hand. When he saw her, the colour completely drained from his face. The aggressive protective stance he had taken at the gala immediately returned his broad shoulders, filling the doorframe to block any view of the house's interior. "I told you to stay away from us, Vera," Ledger said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Don't you dare play the victim with me, Ledger Walker," Vera spat, using his real name like a weapon. She shoved the manila folder hard into his chest. "I know who you are. And I know who he is. The lab at Cascade Genetics doesn't make mistakes." Ledger didn't even look at the folder. He let it drop to the porch floor, the pristine white papers spilling out over the damp wood, revealing the bold 99.999% probability. He glared down at her, his jaw clenching so hard she thought his teeth might crack. "So what?" Ledger sneered, his grey eyes blazing with a hatred so profound it made Vera physically take a step back. "You finally decided your corporate empire was secure enough to play mummy. Was the IPO successful enough for you? Did Arthur finally give you his blessing to acknowledge the son you threw away like garbage?" Threw away. Vera screamed, the carefully constructed Ice Queen facade shattering into a million jagged pieces. Tears mixed with the rain on her cheeks. "My father told me he died. I woke up in that sterile room at Swedish Medical Center, bleeding and alone, and Arthur stood over my bed and handed me a death certificate. I have mourned my son every single day for 5 years. I thought his lungs had failed." Ledger went entirely still. The wrench slipped from his grip, clattering loudly onto the porch. He stared at her, searching her desperate, sobbing face for any sign of deception. He had spent half a decade despising this woman, believing she had ruthlessly chosen her CEO title over their child. Seeing her break down, seeing the raw, unadulterated agony tearing through her, dismantled his entire worldview in a matter of seconds. "He told you he was dead?" Ledger whispered, the anger draining from him, replaced by a chilling realization. Vera reached into her coat pocket with trembling hands and pulled out a small velvet box. She snapped it open, revealing the tiny, hand-knitted hospital booties. "This is all I had left. This and a piece of paper, signed by Dr. Aris. My father swore the umbilical cord was wrapped. He swore they tried everything to save him. Ledger closed his eyes, a heavy, ragged sigh escaping his lips as he ran a hand through his damp hair. God, Arthur was an absolute monster. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to come out of the rain. Vera stepped cautiously into the warm, dimly lit hallway. The house smelled like cinnamon and cedarwood. Toys were scattered across a woven rug in the living room. My sister was a neonatal nurse at the hospital that night. Ledger began, his voice devoid of emotion, the trauma of the past resurfacing. She was on the floor when you delivered. She heard Arthur talking to Dr. Aris in the hallway. Arthur paid the doctor an obscene amount of money from an offshore Chase bank account to falsify the medical records. Vera collapsed onto the edge of the living room sofa, her hands covering her mouth. Arthur thought I was beneath you. Ledger continued pacing the hardwood floor. He thought a child tying you to a junior architect would ruin your focus, ruin the Harrington legacy. He arranged for Luke to be quietly transferred out the back door and handed over to a private, highly questionable orphanage in Eastern Europe. He was just going to erase him. How did you get him? Vera choked out. My sister called me in a panic, Ledger said, looking toward the staircase where his son was asleep. I drove to the hospital, intercepted the transport van in the loading dock, and took my son. I knew Arthur would use all of Harrington Global's resources to hunt me down if he knew I had him. So I abandoned my career. I bought fake papers on the black market. I became a florist. I hid in plain sight, terrified every single day that your father's security team would kick down my door and take him away. The silence in the living room was deafening, broken only by the steady drum of rain against the window panes. Vera looked at Ledger, really looked at him. This man had sacrificed his dreams, his identity, and his entire future to protect their child from the very family she had dedicated her life to running. He had carried the weight of the world on his shoulders entirely alone while she sat in her ivory tower. A cold, terrifying calm suddenly washed over Vera. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in her chest, but it was rapidly being consumed by a blinding, righteous fury. Her father was dead beyond the reach of her vengeance, but the people who helped him, the doctors who sold her son's life for a paycheck, they were very much alive. Ledger, Vera said, standing up. Her voice was no longer trembling. It was the voice of the CEO, who routinely annihilated rival corporations. Pack a bag for you and Luke. You aren't staying here tonight. You're coming to my secure estate. And tomorrow, we are going to burn their entire world to the ground. The following weeks were a masterclass in corporate warfare and hard karma. Vera Harrington did not just seek justice. She sought absolute destruction, utilizing the bottomless wealth of Harrington Global and Mercer's shadowy intelligence network. Vera systematically dismantled Dr. Aris. She didn't just report him to the medical board. She quietly purchased the massive commercial debt his private practice held, called in the loans immediately, and foreclosed on his luxury properties. When the state medical board received an anonymously mailed, fully decrypted flash drive detailing decades of medical fraud and bribery involving elite families, Aris was stripped of his license and indicted by federal prosecutors before the week was out. Every single hospital administrator nurse and board member who had turned a blind eye to Arthur Harrington's cruelty was systematically targeted, professionally ruined, and ousted from polite society. Vera scrubbed the rot from her father's legacy with ruthless precision. But while the corporate bloodbath raged in the city, a profound healing was taking place away from the cameras. Vera had relocated Ledger and Luke to her private, heavily fortified timber frame retreat nestled in the foothills of Mount Rainier. Far from the suffocating pressure of Seattle, The three of them began the delicate, terrifying process of becoming a family. For the first few days, Luke was hesitant. He remembered the striking woman from the gala, but having her suddenly in his house, making pancakes, was a massive adjustment. Vera, terrified of breaking the fragile peace, followed Ledger's lead entirely. She stripped off her designer gowns, trading them for oversized sweaters and denim, and spent hours sitting on the floor helping Luke construct elaborate, structurally sound castles out of wooden blocks, a skill the boy had clearly inherited from his architect father. One evening, after Luke had finally fallen asleep in the loft, Vera and Ledger sat on the wraparound wooden porch. The air was crisp, scented with pine needles, and the distant chill of the mountain snowcaps. The sky was an ocean of brilliant stars, unpolluted by city lights. Ledger handed her a mug of hot chamomile tea. Their fingers brushed against the warm ceramic, lingering just a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "He asked me today if you were going back to the big tower," Ledger said softly, looking out at the tree line. Vera traced the rim of the mug. "What did you tell him?" "I told him that was up to you," Ledger replied, turning his gaze to her. The anger that had defined his eyes for 5 years was entirely gone, replaced by a quiet, steady warmth. "You've burned down half the medical establishment in Washington State, Vera. The board of directors is panicking. The press is swarming. You have an empire to run." "I don't care about the empire," Vera said, the realization striking her with absolute clarity. "I spent 5 years building my life around Harrington Global because I thought it was the only thing I had left. I thought my heart died in that hospital room. But it didn't. It's upstairs sleeping under a dinosaur blanket." She set her mug down on the wooden railing and turned to fully face him. "And the other half of my heart has been hiding out in the suburbs, fixing floral arches and sacrificing everything to keep our son safe." Ledger's breath hitched. He looked at her, seeing past the billionaire CEO, past the intimidating legacy of her family, straight down to the vulnerable woman he had fallen in love with in a dusty architectural drafting room all those years ago. He reached out his calloused thumb, gently brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "We're broken." Vera Ledger whispered his forehead, coming to rest gently against hers. "Both of us. We've lost so much time." "Then we build something new," Vera murmured, closing her eyes as she leaned into his touch, feeling safe for the first time in her adult life. "You're the architect. I'm the developer. We'll build it from the ground up." Ledger kissed her. It wasn't the frantic, desperate passion of their youth. It was a slow, deep promise of permanence. It was a reclamation of everything that had been stolen from them. 6 months later, the society pages of Seattle were buzzing with the news that the formidable Vera Harrington had officially stepped down as the active CEO of Harrington Global, transitioning to a silent chairperson role. In her place, she had poured her vast resources into a new venture, a massive, fiercely protected charitable foundation dedicated to supporting single parents and reforming the foster care system, entirely funded by the liquid assets of her late father's estate. On a bright Tuesday morning, the Fairmont Olympic Hotel hosted another gala, but this one felt entirely different. Standing by the grand entrance greeting guests was a family. Vera, radiant and genuinely smiling, held the hand of a bouncing 5-year-old boy whose bright green eyes mirrored her own. Beside them stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in a perfectly tailored suit, an acclaimed architect who had just unveiled the blueprints for the city's newest pediatric hospital wing. There were no more secrets, no more shadows, and no more ghosts. Just Vera Harrington, Ledger Walker, and Luke Walker, finally exactly where they belonged. Did this dramatic tale of corporate betrayal and romance keep you on your toes? The truth, always surfaces when a mother's love is tested. If you loved Vera and Ledger's journey to protect their family, please hit the like button right now. Share this video with friends who crave an epic plot twist and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling story content every single week. Thanks for watching today.